Naomi speaking.
Hi, this is Riccardo Stagliano speaking from La Repubblica in Italy.
Hi,
Hi,
how are you?
I'm fine. Uh,
Good.
Thank you so much for your time. I really care about this because we met many years ago in Milan for another book, but it was a long time ago. Um,
Nice to talk with you.
Great. So let's start immediately. Um, No logo is turning 20. What is the insight that you feel more proud about it now?
Um, well, so yes, it's a interesting anniversary. It's a kind of year of these anniversaries, 20 years
Yeah.
um, since No Logo and Seattle,
Yeah.
and 10 years since the Copenhagen summit.
Yeah.
Um, um, what I would say is I feel more and more that the underlying message of No Logo
Yeah.
was really about the dangers of um, a of a way of life
Yeah.
built on endless consumption, and the process, branding, by which multinational corporations were transforming shopping into a way of life, into a way of forming identity, a way of forming group belonging. So not about buying things that we need, but about building ourselves.
Yeah.
And that model, which is what No Logo was about 20 years ago, is really at the heart of the climate crisis, of the global ecological crisis.
Yeah.
It's a disaster on every level, I think. It's called, sorry, my dog is barking at me because she thinks I'm, no, it's me. So hold on a second, I'm just going to deal with her. Hold on. Sit with the dog. So I think that for me is what I think about most, and why in some ways I feel that it is more relevant today than 20 years ago, and more relevant than I understood 20 years ago. Because when I wrote No Logo, it was mainly focused on the impacts of the consumer way of life on culture, on identity, on labor, and on the local environment. But I didn't understand its implications for the entire world, for the globe itself, for on a planetary scale. And I think when we look at why emissions are going up year after year after year, despite all of the talk about going green, it is about the successful globalization of that impossibly unsustainable way of living.
Yeah. So if you should say what has been the main societal change since then, is the worsening of the global of the climate crisis, or what else?
Well, I think there have been many interesting shifts since No Logo.
Yeah.
I think on the positive side, there is a robust critique now of capital, and a generation of activists around the world who are focused on alternatives, and not just the critique, on putting forward political alternatives, and making connections between the environment, labor, climate, technological addiction, so many issues, and including more psychological and spiritual crises that we face. So that is a real shift, because when I wrote No Logo, there was really, it was still the neoliberal, the power of of neoliberalism over the imagination was still so strong that it was almost shocking to have a critique of corporations, in the year 2000. And so that has shifted, but of course the impacts are so much worse, because after 20 years and this and the fact that huge economies like China and India have embraced this completely unsustainable way of life, has terrifying planetary implications. So the stakes are higher, the resistance is greater, but there is also, because of the economic insecurity that has spread throughout the globe, because of the economic policies that I was writing about 20 years ago, we also have the terrifying rise of the right, of the far right, of the fascist right, that is preying on people's insecurity, economic insecurity, and ecological insecurity, and pitting people against each other around the world. So a lot, I think a lot has changed for worse and for better in those 20 years, and the moment we're in is very profound. I feel like we've never been closer to collapse. Sorry, my phone is beeping. Sorry. But we also, in the United States, where I'm talking to you from, we've never been closer to, in my lifetime, and even and frankly in my parents' lifetime, to potentially electing, a democratic socialist to be the president of the United States. It may not, it's still unlikely, but it's possible for the first time in my life.
Sorry, this was a question supposed to be for later, but since you quoted, when you're talking about potentially democratic socialists, you're thinking about Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, I think it's very significant that right now, the two leading candidates in some of the largest states, like California right now, Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren are first and second in the polls, right? And Bernie Sanders is running an explicitly anti-capitalist campaign, running as an open democratic socialist. Elizabeth Warren is, her entire campaign is a critique of corporate power and corruption. She is not a socialist, but she's running on a more left campaign than I've ever seen in my lifetime. So there is a huge shift that is happening. I support Bernie, but I would be happy with Elizabeth Warren as well. Either of them would be a transformation.
Yeah. Which is surprising. I don't know. I tend to be very skeptical, because I used to follow Bernie Sanders during in Iowa, and there was such an excitement. I've been with him 5 days during that first campaign, but then we all know how it ended. So I tend to rein.
Sure, absolutely. And look, I'm skeptical. Look, I'm not saying it's going to happen. What I'm saying is there is a possibility. And this is new. When I wrote, the year that No Logo came out, Ralph Nader ran for president and didn't get 5%. So that's a shift. That's a shift.
A huge shift. That's for sure. Maybe we needed to go through Donald Trump in order to have that. Who knows? Anyway. For certain, so you say the positive side and negative side since then, but there is at least according to me, we are in a worse situation than then vis-a-vis. Uh, it was back then. It was easier to boycott McDonald's, but now it's almost impossible to boycott at the same time Google, Amazon,
Yeah,
Facebook
absolutely.
altogether. Am I wrong with that? I mean, we are more intertwined in the power of.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, I think when it comes to um, corporate power and
yeah,
branding, the it's not only that you can't avoid these tech companies.
yeah,
It's also that they have enabled, like through social media, um, a form of personal branding,
yes,
of
yes,
the individual
yeah,
and of movements as well, that was unthinkable 20 years ago, right?
yeah,
I mean, when I wrote No Logo, there was, there were people saying, oh, everybody should be their own brand, but nobody could be their own brand
yeah,
unless you were a celebrity,
yeah,
because it's not like you could afford to take ads out for
yeah,
yourself. Um, but I think the transformation over the past decade, thanks to Facebook and Twitter,
yeah,
um, has meant that in this age of economic precariousness, it really is possible for people to monetize themselves, right,
yeah,
their identities in a way that was not possible before. And so I think we have the infiltration of the logic of the corporation to the individual.
yeah,
So it isn't only that we're using Google and Facebook and Twitter. It is that thanks to them, we are turning ourselves into commodities all the time, right?
yeah,
Um, and that's the promise of how to get ahead in this economy for now. For young people today, it's a very practical way to think about how you're going to manage to make money in an extremely competitive economy. And we know that it's true. That book publishers give contracts now to people because of how many Twitter followers they
yes,
have. um,
yeah,
and and so and then in addition to that, what these companies are doing, their entire business model, is to extract the data
yeah,
of based on our behaviors online, to mine our most intimate thoughts, creative expressions,
yeah,
locations, and to turn that into a new extractive frontier. So this is a profound deepening of the privatization of the commons, right?
yeah,
I mean, I think we're seeing
yeah,
the final enclosure where, it's what started with the enclosure of land
yeah.
is now the enclosure of the very self.
This is, I suspect, the topic of the course you are teaching at Rutgers. Is that correct? The corporate self.
Yeah, this is what I've been exploring with my students over the past year.
Yeah,
Hmm.
I totally agree with that. Apart from the fact that, yeah, the logic has infiltrated the self, but it's it's not really very widespread to be able to profit. I mean, for normal people, normal kids, to profit from those data. I mean, the influencers are still kind of minority. Most of people are extracted data without having back almost anything. Don't you think?
No, most people. I think there's the promise.
Yeah.
Um, there's the promise of it, but most people are just treated
Yeah.
as an site of extraction.
Yeah.
But the promise of it, I think, motivates a lot of people.
Yeah. 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 Okay. Um, a big debate is speculating a little more about this before going to your last book.
Mm-hmm.
A big debate has risen around the unpaid labor we would all do for the social networks.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, in a way, to put it very bluntly, I mean, we work and they get the money. I mean, think about Facebook. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, there wouldn't be anything without us working willingly and unpaidly for them. Uh, th- this is the critique, but until now there hasn't been many convincing countermeasures. What's your take about it? I mean, we cannot think about splitting the advertising money that we got from that that Facebook gets from us, because it's maybe $20 per year. So I mean, it's huge because it's multiplied times 2 billion people. But on a practical level, what do you think we could do to get our due, in a way, from the money that social networks extract from us?
Well, I think it's a complicated question
Yeah.
because, I don't think the answer is just to get paid for our data, because that accepts the idea that we want our relationships and our inner thoughts and our locations to be monetized, right? And the whole process of monetizing all of this has been covert. It hasn't been a transparent, consensual process, unless you actually believe that when people click I agree on a terms of service agreement, that they actually read it, understood it, and had a viable option not to, right?
Yes.
And we know that that's not the case. So I'm suspicious of solutions to this that lead to a further privatization. I mean, I think that these companies have been built through the extraction of not just unpaid labor, but also of public assets. So the internet was built with public dollars. GPS was built with public dollars. They have seized this public wealth and deceptively using a discourse of the commons, right? I mean, Google says that they exist in order to organize the world's information. Facebook says it is a digital town square, right? And so the promise was delivering a commons. They made their services free, and people treated them like a commons. And now it turns out actually they are the site of endless extraction and further privatization. So I think what we need to do, what I believe, is that we do have a right to communicate with each other. We do have a right to information, and in the same way that we've had public broadcasters based on that idea that information is a right, that an informed citizenry is a right, we have to figure out a way to have a true digital commons. And I think it is really tricky to figure out how you do this on a nation-state level when these are transnational spaces, right? And we want to be able to continue to communicate. Hi.
I'm sorry, I don't know what happened, but the line fell.
I don't know. Yeah, just dropped.
You were saying that it's really tricky to treat that on a national state level.
I mean, it is. I don't think the solution is just break them up, right?
Like Elizabeth Warren wants to do.
Yeah. I do think that they should be broken up, but I don't think that alone is the solution. I think that there has to be a combination of breaking up monopolies and a decommodification process. And so I think it's going to be a range of a range of alternatives that emerge. And I think some of them will start smaller and more local, where you'll have some examples of, and we're starting to see some examples of this, of social media on a commons model that's more local. And maybe there's a way to figure out how they can be networked and so on. But I think we need a combination of breaking them up and decommodifying the digital sphere.
I see. Since you quoted that before, since the global justice movement, the political left has tried a few comebacks. No, I'm thinking now about the Occupy Wall Street, which was probably one of the most significant, at least symbolically, attempt to retake the scene, so to speak. What was missing for their success until now? Because I mean, now we are in a new phase. I mean, but still.
Well, I mean, I think the truth is that the way in which we tend to measure successes and failures of social movements, I think, it's a little bit too simplistic, because I think movements are evolutionary, and they don't have neat endings and neat beginnings, right?
Yeah.
And so, people say the movement started in Seattle.
Yeah.
We know it didn't start in Seattle. Like, I wrote a book about the movement before Seattle happened, right?
Yeah.
So there was something happening, and I think in the same way, Occupy Wall Street didn't die. The Seattle movement didn't die. The movements go in these. There are periods when they are above ground, and there are periods when they go underground and splinter and regroup and reemerge. I'm sure that from covering the Bernie Sanders campaign that many people who are at the heart of that campaign were part of Occupy Wall Street.
Yeah.
Some of them go back to the Seattle movement, and it has been a process of learning from mistakes, including the mistakes of not having clear demands, not having clear alternatives. I think that the movement today that is coalescing around a Green New Deal in different countries, in different contexts, comes from learning from the mistakes of the movement of the squares in Europe, in the Arab Spring as well, Occupy Wall Street, movements that were rejectionist but didn't have a clear vision of what the next economy should look like. And I think that people really do understand now that we have to say yes and no simultaneously. And so, these are not different movements. These are different iterations of a process. That seems to disappear as people learn, regroup, and then reemerge as something else, having absorbed those lessons.
I do believe, in fact, that there is some cynicism over. There has been a huge quantity of cynicism about Occupy Wall Street and in judging their failure, so to speak. In fact, I think that there's a continuity between that experience, that great experience, and the Sanders the Sanders campaign now. In No is not enough, you famously said that Trump is an idiot, but do not underestimate how good he is at it, which I find a very brilliant definition. Do you still believe that in the wake of his impeachment?
I think it's dangerous to count him out.
Yeah.
Very dangerous.
Yeah.
And when I wrote No Logo, in the beginning of that book, I think I said something like how when I was a kid I wanted to crawl inside my television set and live there.
Yeah.
And that's the appeal branding culture, right? Is this promise of living a completely sort of airbrushed world. And that's the promise of Disneyland, right? That you get to like live inside your favorite cartoon. Donald Duck, Donald Trump is a cartoon.
Yeah.
He is a cartoon.
Yeah.
He has offered Americans the opportunity to crawl inside their television sets and live there, or at least pretend to live there. And the shock is that it's in any way a surprise. Of course they said yes. This has been the promise all along. Now Arundhati Roy said in a very famous speech after September 11th, she said that we don't have to choose between the mad mullahs and a malevolent Mickey Mouse. And I think that that's what Trump is. He's this malevolent Donald Duck. But don't underestimate him. Yeah. Because Americans want to crawl inside their television sets, and especially their cartoons. Go to Disneyland, check it out.
Talking about On Fire now, you make a great argument for the Green New Deal, and by the way, I've also recently interviewed Robert Hockett, who has had a role into drafting in a way the platform. According to you, because it seems great, but how likely it is that it will become a reality?
So, unlikely. And so the question is, what are people doing to make it more likely? I mean, that's the only question I'm interested in. Of course, it's unlikely. It's also our last chance on the climate clock. It is the only plan that is as bold as is required to lower emissions in line with what scientists are telling us we must do. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report from October of 2018 says that it will require unprecedented transformation in every aspect of society, which is what a Green New Deal is. What we are seeing right now in Madrid with this climate summit is, I think it's like a zombie. It's like a zombie climate summit, right? In that it's staggering around. It had to stagger around to try to find a home, right? No one wanted it. It was supposed to be It was supposed to be in Brazil. But then, of course, Bolsonaro was elected, and one of the first things he did was cancel it. And then Sebastián Piñera steps in and says, well, he'll host it, but of course he's an incredibly neoliberal president. So the way they did it, the way they prepared for hosting of the COP was, the ultimate expression of how neoliberalism proposes to deal with the climate crisis, which is to leave it to the markets and to force working people, overstressed people who are already suffering under the weight of austerity and precarity, to pay the bill. So they went and got themselves a fleet of flashy electric buses and paid for it by increasing transit fares. And that was the spark that led to the Chilean uprising, against 4 decades of neoliberalism. And so then Spain steps in and says, okay, we'll do it, but we're going to get the biggest polluters to sponsor it. And we're going to Um, the whole thing has just become so absurd, right? And I think what we see is the absolute abject failure of these various forms of neoliberal responses to the climate crisis. They don't lower emissions. They generate massive backlashes. They do not get the job done. And if your solutions lead to massive backlashes, they are not solutions. They are the problem, right? So what we should be, the way I think we should be understanding this charade that is taking place in Madrid right now is this should be the death knell for this zombie approach to the climate crisis. And maybe out of this will emerge a real solution, which, is the Green New Deal model, which has not been tried. We have tried the neoliberal response to the climate crisis for 25 years. It is called COP25 because we have been at this for 25 years. And, how many more years are we going to pretend to do this? They could barely find a host for the summit. This model has failed so miserably. So that's where we're at. All I can tell you about our chances is that if we stick with the old model, we are certain to fail. If we try to change course, we have a slim chance of success. I'm sorry I can't be more cheerful than that.
No. I find that totally realistic. We exclude what we already know that has failed so miserably, and we try with something else. You were chosen for discussing with Greta Thunberg once she reached New York City after sailing the Atlantic. What impressed you more from that encounter? Also on a personal level, something that you didn't expect or something that didn't come out?
Well, I think one of the things that I find most amazing about Greta is that she is so committed to living up to her, to doing everything she possibly can, right?
Yeah.
Oh, that she subjects herself to situations that are incredibly hard for her, right? What's hard for Greta is not sailing across the Atlantic.
Yeah.
She likes that. She loves nature. She loves being, in nature, and she loves being with small groups of people, I think, who she likes. What is really difficult is being in huge crowds of people and being surrounded by cameras and not having any personal space and being in big cities, and that is what she's subjecting herself to. When I saw the image of her getting off the train in Madrid and being surrounded by all of those cameras, I really felt for her, because I think that for somebody with her temperament, that kind of intense crowding is really hard. And I just have so much respect for her because she's doing the hardest stuff, the stuff that's hardest for her. And that's what we all have to do. We have to just get out of our comfort zone. She is so literally out of her comfort zone, right? And I think that's what's most striking when you meet her, right? Especially in the context of a big crowd of people, is that, when she talks about being on the autism spectrum and, and she says, how uninterested she is in your social games, as she puts it, right? She really means it. In my conversation with her, you see that where she lights up, where she's happy, is when she's talking about sailing in the Atlantic, and when she's talking about being in wilderness, and you see it in her speeches as well. How moved she is talking about the losses in the natural world, and this is true for so many children. Children are so so naturally, like, I mean, like, this is why children's books are filled with animals, right? Because children have a natural love of the rest of the natural world and natural connection that we then, too many of us, lose over time. And so, yeah, I think that she's really modeling what we all need to do, which is things that are hard, things that are hard for us.
But what does it say about the world we are living in when a 16 years old can have a bigger impact of generations of scientists and environmentalists?
Look, we are in a breakthrough moment on climate, and Greta is part of that breakthrough. But I don't think it would be possible for her to have that breakthrough if it hadn't been for people who've come before her, and she knows that, and she knows that she didn't invent the youth climate movement, that there have been other young people before her, and so I guess I just don't accept the framing, like what is like that she's having this breakthrough and other people haven't. I mean, I think that's not the way history works. I think that we push and we push and we push, and then finally a door opens, right? And nobody knows when that door is going to open. You know, the first political demonstration that I ever really participated in was when I was in the first year university in 1989, and we occupied the office of the president of the university and demanded that they divest from South Africa. And a few weeks later, Nelson Mandela walked free from prison. So is that because me and my friends occupied the office? Like, I don't think so. I think we just were lucky.
That's a very frequent fallacy. But you cannot. I think you cannot underestimate the effect she's having. I mean, and then
no, I don't underestimate it.
Yeah, of course, you're not doing that.
I don't do that. Yeah. But look, I mean, the crisis has changed. This generation is living climate change. Yeah. You know, they're not talking about something off in the future. They're talking about the wildfires that blanket their communities every summer. They're talking about the heat waves that they're living through. They're talking about superstorms that they're surviving. Yeah. So, you know, the nature of the crisis has changed, and their anger is so raw. And I think, you know, one of the most powerful things about Greta in our culture, and I think this comes back to what we were talking about earlier about social media and what it has done to people, right? Yep. Is, you know, we live in a society that is all about people performing themselves, you know, performing versions of themselves for each other, right? Creating consumable versions of themselves, including in activism, right? Yeah. You know, this is what virtue signaling is. And I think part of the power of Greta is she is completely devoid of that performance gene, right? In that when she communicates, all she is trying to do is communicate information as clearly as she possibly can. You can tell from looking at her that she is not worried about whether we think she is cute. Yeah. She is not worried about whether we think she is politically correct. Yeah. She's not trying to charm anybody. And I think in a culture that is so immersed in people performing versions of themselves and engaging in various forms of seduction, including virtue signaling, that when we see people who are not playing that game, there's something extremely powerful about that. I think Bernie Sanders has that as well, by the way.
Yeah.
I think this is part of Bernie's power, particularly for this generation that is so immersed in this. People trust Bernie because Bernie is the opposite of Instagram, which is not to say that Bernie doesn't know how to use Instagram or that people around Bernie don't know how to use Instagram. But Bernie is the opposite of Instagram.
Yeah.
And I think that is also true of Greta. And that's a big part of her power, is her absolute absence of artifice and performance.
Very last two questions. Since you said that is the opposite of Instagram, and I definitely agree with that. In fact, also some of his advisors suggested him to laugh a little more, to look happier from time to time. That's not the case with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. In a way, she's the daughter, so to speak, of Bernie Sanders, but she's got a completely different persona, no? Digital persona.
Yeah.
She's very active, she's very savvy, she's good looking, and so on and so forth. She's young. How do these two personalities coexist? I mean, in the same field, according to you?
Yeah, I think it's an interesting question. It's very interesting seeing them campaign together. And I mean, there's no doubt that she's incredibly skilled at using these technologies, and I guess all I can say is that I think it was very powerful when she decided to endorse Bernie at the lowest point in his campaign, because it was so clearly not about her personal ambition, because it was a very risky thing to do in terms of her personal ambition. And really, when she talks about it, it's really about loyalty and values. And, I would say even though she makes use of these technologies and I think that the culture that is being built around solidarity, not me, us, finding common ground across differences. When she goes to Iowa and says, I've never been to Iowa before. I don't know you. You don't know me. But I believe that we have things that are truly in common, and trying to find that common ground. I think all of this is an attempt to have a cultural shift away from the hyper-individualism that is really at the heart of the crisis that we're living through. We will not get through this if we do not overcome the obsession with ego and individualism that has invaded our very selves, our identities. That is at the heart of this, surveillance capitalism economy, and I think people are understanding that. That is what I really think is the resonance of that slogan, "Not me, us." Of Bernie, saying at the end of the rally in Queens, like, are you willing to fight for someone you don't know? And I think more and more we're seeing examples of people trying to live their values in this way. Like, I was struck the other day, 2 days ago, when the winners of the Turner Prize in London, the art prize. I don't know if you saw this, but
sorry, what is that?
Oh, this big art prize, the Turner Prize, in London. Yeah. 3 nights ago, there were four artists on the short list, and they were all engaged in various kinds of political art. Work about migrants, about refugees, about climate change. and they got together and they formed themselves into a collective and told the jurors that they didn't want one of them to win the prize, that they wanted to give it to the collective, because they said, we're never going to get anywhere if we keep trying to create these individual heroes and these individual winners, and our work is about solidarity, and so you have to give it to all of us. And this had never happened before, and this is like the biggest art prize in England, and they did it, or I think about Pia Klemp, the captain of the boat rescuing migrants, refusing the prize in Paris and saying, we don't need more prizes for heroism. We actually need to save people. I think there's a way in which people are rejecting this celebrity activism culture, this whole culture of creating, the individual heroes, and trying to are reaching towards something else, And the question for me is art is really just about time. Are we going to do it? Are we going to do this in time? In the short time we have left, because there's no doubt that there's a shift happening. But there's race against time, and it's a race against climate breakdown, and it's also a race against rising fascism. These are the three variables that we're dealing with right now.
Very, very last question. Are you familiar with the last book by Jonathan Safran Foer about changing our eating habits in order to save the planet?
Yes.
Do you believe that it's a matter of individual choices, and if so, what are yours?
I do think that I do think individual choices matter. I do think that the things that we do to bring our actions aligned with our values make us stronger in terms of the kind of moral authority in these moments, right? I think Greta getting off a boat, and taking the stand that she has more power because she got off that boat, I think she feels better in herself, in her skin, because she did that, But I also think that we are within a system that we have to all figure out to varying degrees how we're going to use that system in order to transform the system, right? And if we try to turn our lives into carbon-free, museums, we're not going to do the political work, all of us, So we all make our different compromises, and I make all kinds of compromises, and I also have made all kinds of changes. So the reason I'm teaching right now is so that I'm traveling a lot less, right? I mean, I used to take flights like they were nothing, and I'm much more selective now, much to the chagrin of my international publishers, who would much prefer that I continued to do what I used to do, but I don't do it, I still fly too much, but I fly a fraction of what I used to fly. And there are all kinds of other things that I do, but I also, since I wrote No Logo, have been trying to challenge the idea that our primary sphere of activism is our consumption, right? I mean, ever since I wrote No Logo, people have been asking me what kind of running shoes they should buy and what they should, and I've been saying, we are not going to solve this through our shopping. And so I think that that Jonathan Safran Foer has, it is certainly writes, has consistently written in interesting ways about the moral, the moral challenges of being meat and his own personal struggles with that. and I absolutely think that we need to not be eating. We need to be eating a lot less meat. And I certainly have cut out a lot of meat. Hold on a second. Something is beeping, and I don't know what it is. I think we just had a power out. Anyway, at least I still have my phone. But
Hello?
Yeah. Did I lose you?
Yeah, I'm still there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So get away from this beeping. So I disagree with the focus. The change in the world begins at breakfast.
Yeah.
I think that part of what has failed in these 25 years has been precisely that message. That we begin with our recycling, and that we are going to do this through our personal consumption habits.
Yeah.
It is a huge success of the neoliberal project that we see ourselves, our power, our sphere of power, as consumption first, and not the collective power that we have when we organize together. And I think that is something that Greta understands full well. That she understands she's making a powerful point by not flying, but that her real power is in organizing a movement with other young people. She's very, very clear about that, right? And I think Jonathan Safran is a little bit less clear about that.
Okay.
Okay.
Perfectly clear.
All right, cool.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your time. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, lovely to talk with you.
If I should have just a minor, very brief clarification to ask, should I send an email to... I used to have an email of some of your assistants. Can you give me the email of an assistant?
Yeah, Jackie. I think you've got Jackie's contact, KLP123. Yeah. Okay, cool.
Thank you very much.
All right,
have
great.
A good day.
All right, take care.
All the best.
You too. Bye-bye.